Hello, and welcome to 4MTV. We are an initiative in North America focused on mental health awareness. The 4M's stand for mental health, migration, multi-language and culture, and mindfulness. And we are practicing mindfulness across borders. This is really an initiative to bring mental health awareness to the globe and to share resources with people who might not usually have access. So thank you for joining us today and welcome. I am your host, Kara Kihm. I am a psychotherapist and a somatic energy worker, and I have a private practice specializing in working with highly sensitive women and empaths. I am also an author of Discovering My Wings, which is my book that talks about how my life radically transformed when I started fearlessly following the voice of my intuition. It's an adventure book, and it talks about how I sold everything and drove to Alaska alone in search of my own soul. So it's a fun one. And we're very excited to have Brooke Siem here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Brooke has written a memoir called May Cause Side Effects. And this is her personal journey about antidepressant withdrawal and how that really affected her life. She has been featured in the Washington Post, the New York Post, Psychology Today, and she is a public speaker on this topic. So I'm very excited to have her here today. She's also happens to be a chef, and I love that. That's so fun. And you won the championship on the Food Network for the show Chop.
Yeah.
So thank you, Brooke, for joining us here today. It's a real treat, and I'm excited to share your journey with our audience. I'm going to start out by reading the introduction because it's good, and I really identified with it. It's emotional, it's moving, and then we'll talk about how you got here. So Brooke starts with, there was a time, a long time, when I didn't believe I could ever be all right. That all right was a concept invented by whole people with whole hearts who can never understand how depression thumped inside me with regularity of my own pulse. What did they know anyways? Even the professionals told me I would never truly be all right. It was genetic, they said, predisposed, a chemical imbalance. Like a diabetic who needs insulin. Take this pill. Come back in 6 months. We'll find a way to manage you. That makes me want to cry. I mean, that is a powerful introduction. So can we share with the audience how we got here to this moment and what led up to that for those who haven't read your book?
How we got to the moment of the introduction, or how we got to where I started writing the book, or
Yeah. How we got to the point where you were told you had a chemical imbalance, you were predisposed, this visit with the doctor.
Sure. That was all happened many years ago at this point.
Yeah.
I was 15 years old and my father had suddenly passed away. And, that wasn't an easy time.
Right.
And it was 2001. And so the context was a little bit different. But, it was summer when it happened. I was in between my my freshman and sophomore year. And I think that maybe the timing of it was such that my father died in July, August, school started at the end of August. And I think that by the time I started to get into the fall semester sophomore year, there was just a little bit of concern that I wasn't myself. I don't back to normal. I don't even really know what people were expecting, but everyone just kind of looked around, and I was extremely stoic, and my grades were slipping a little bit. It wasn't terrible, but it was enough that there was just some concerns. And so I was taken to a child psychologist first. My mom did say, like, let's go try therapy. And unfortunately, that child psychologist broke my trust very early on in our relationship, which I outline a little bit in the book. And, after that happened, I shut down and I said, this is not going to work. And so I didn't cooperate because she broke my trust. And so over the course of a few more sessions, eventually my mom got a phone call, and the child psychologist had said that what I really needed was a psychiatrist, that she was diagnosing a depressive and anxiety disorder, that basically there was nothing she could do. So go see a doctor and get medication.
Wow.
And, so, I mean, what did you expect anyone to do, right? I mean, it was 2001. I was raised to respect doctors and institutions, and if they tell me I'm sick,
Absolutely.
take a pill, right? So
Yes.
that's what we did. We went to the child psychiatrist. I was given a cocktail of antidepressants, and that's when I received this message. That's when the words genetics were mentioned and chemical
Yes.
imbalance. And, it was all told to me in this way of trying to, I think, make it seem like it wasn't my fault.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when you tell someone that it's not their fault, the message is it's not their fault and there's nothing you can do.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, were they even discussing the fact that your father had passed away and that these symptoms really came about post grief? I mean, because I can't imagine a more natural and normal reaction to such a traumatic loss at that age.
At that age, and I think we're really seeing it now with the skyrocketed rates of, medicating children and teens.
Hmm.
I think parents are operating in a state of fear a lot
Yeah.
of the time. And so my mom told me, in more recent years, because we've had a lot of conversations about this, she said, I had just lost one third of my family. I was so terrified I'd lose the other third as
Yes.
well. And because I was a serious ballet dancer, so I was very concerned with food. I was exhibiting maybe some eating disorder behaviors because of the ballet. She was worried that that was going to get out of control. I was never really hanging out with the wrong crowd, so I didn't really think I was at risk of you know getting into drugs or alcohol in an unsafe way. That's not really where the risk was. I just think it was this level of like, if these drugs could prevent something terrible happening, why wouldn't we take them?
Yeah. Yes.
The problem is that's really misguided. That's misguided in an understanding of what these drugs do and don't do, especially in 2001, when, I mean, at that point in time, the only drugs that were approved for use in children and teens were Zoloft and Prozac.
Mm-hmm.
I was put on Effexor and Wellbutrin.
Right.
So
Right.
those still aren't approved for children or teens. And so it was a mess. It was a mess.
Yeah.
And, it really, it altered the course of my life, I think, more than the death of my father.
Wow. That is so powerful. And I too was put on antidepressants as a child. And I do believe our parents were doing what they thought was right with the guidance they were given.
Mhm.
And I think now we're coming into this new collective narrative that depression is a natural, normal part of grieving. And if we can look at the grief cycles, which we have a little bit more awareness of, hopefully, then we can work with the grief instead of jumping to medication right away.
Yeah. I've taken a stance as of late where I really try, when I'm speaking to other people, and I'm trying to get them to really go deeper and
Mhm.
just kind of dig a little bit. I ask them to explain to me what's going on without using the word depression or
Yes.
without using the word anxiety. And you would be shocked at how quickly the real issues come right up, right?
Yes.
Because we have taken such a turn with these words, and we are now able to use them in a way where they just encompass any state of either uncomfortableness or, sadness, upset, grief, whatever it is. But because they're sort of, I don't want to say meaningless. That's not quite the right word. Just because they're so generic in a way, and that's so overused and misapplied, then it allows people to kind of just put it into the depression bucket and leave it there and not really
Yes.
understand what's going on. And
Right.
then when you throw a drug at them that literally has the word anti in front of it, right? Antidepressant,
Mhm.
suddenly it's a very, very short road between, oh, I am depressed, so here's my antidepressant. Like, you just kind of make the connection and go forth. There's no anti-grief drug.
Right. Right. Yes.
So yeah, I try and really avoid those words, and I find it's much more helpful in really having meaningful conversations with people.
I couldn't agree more. And I find that the power of language is really important in the therapeutic realm.
Mhm.
And there is certainly a time for people who have this really intense chronic depression and different diagnoses that they need some extra support for a certain amount of time. But I think the problem is, and we'll get to that in your book, is that we're not told about the side effects. And I think that's really, really important. We're not told about withdrawal. And we've made everything a pill a solution for everything. So it's now a solution for grief. It's now a solution for a breakup. It's now a solution for anything that we're experiencing in our personal lives, when some of these are just very natural reactions to hard events. And I saw my mom go through with this. My brother had passed away a couple years ago, and the first thing they tried to do was medicate her. I said, Mom, I can't think of a more appropriate reaction than how you're feeling right now. I mean, if you're not getting out of bed in a couple years, let's talk about it. But right now, you're just working through natural emotions that should be accompanied with such a great loss.
Yeah, I think it's a really slippery slope to kind of it's tricky because I don't want to fully close the door, but I really find that even leaving it a crack open allows for everyone to step through that crack. And I say that because that's what I did. I spent 15 years doing that, right? Like, it's not like it had never occurred to me to get off the antidepressants, or, a handful of people would question them in my life. And I had determined, because I had so built the narrative up in my own head and told myself a story, and all, mental distress, mental illness is subjective. It's all relative to the person who's experiencing it, right? So I was able to very easily, decide that I was one of the people who needed it. In retrospect, that was a story I was telling myself, and just the fact that the door was open allowed me to walk through it. So,
and it was a story that you were given. I mean, people very much reinforce this story. So of course you internalized it. That makes so much sense. And
the world reinforces this story every day, please.
It's absolutely. And so your book takes us through this journey where there you are, you're after your father's death. And then in your 30s, you were 30, when all of a sudden you sort of had this epiphany and this moment of, who would I be without antidepressants? I've been on them for so long. And that is such a powerful moment, because not everyone has that epiphany moment and actually takes action around it.
Yeah, well, not everyone is a bit of a weirdo, I guess, in the way that I am. I'm very I'm very interested in thinking about things from as many different perspectives as I can. And one of the ways that I did that, and I still continue to do this in different ways throughout my life, is through counting. I find that sometimes, emotions can be so big and that they become almost meaningless, and I need to find a way to quantify it, to understand in something grounded what it is that I am feeling or experiencing. And so one of my solutions to this has been to count the number of instances something has happened, or the length of time something has occurred, or, how many times I could have watched one movie over and over again in the amount of time that I, did an activity, right? I mean, just these little ways help me kind of make sense of the world. And so the moment that I really had the epiphany was just when I realized that I had calculated the number of days I'd been alive, and how many days since my father had been dead. And I realized that there was this kind of precipice coming up where I was about to transition into more than half my life of being medicated. And they kind of coincided, right? So not only was I about to go to the time where I will have spent more time on earth without my father than I had with him, which was which was odd.
Yeah.
And that also meant that I was reaching the point where I had would be spending more time medicated than not. And given that I wasn't thriving in any way, and that it's hard to, count the first 5 years that you can't remember as part of your life, I just started to look at the scale here, and I was like, this is not feeling okay, because I am not thriving. In fact, I'm still deeply depressed. I'm having suicidal ideation. I can't fathom the idea of being alive for 50 more years or whatever, I'm projected to live for. do I really want to spend it like this? And that's kind of when it just occurred to me that, I don't know who I might be or how my life might be without these drugs, but I knew that that particular combination was not working. So
Yes.
initially I thought, let's just get off of them, discover my baseline. And I was fully in it. Then we'll just go to something else because that's how I thought this worked. And
Yeah.
as it turns out, that's not how it worked, at
Mhm.
least not for me.
Mhm.
And that's kind of when everything blew up.
Yes. And in these moments where there's a huge blow up, I find that they're incredibly transformative. I mean, that kind of shifted your entire trajectory.
Except they're not usually moments. That's the problem.
Well,
They're usually
yeah,
like a
period.
year of blow up, and
Yes.
you're just like cannot see the end.
Yes. Yes. You know what? And I have a therapist who I work with who tells me, and I love this. She tells me the wise woman knows how to walk through the underworld world.
Mm-hmm.
So she has that resilience. She has that strength. She has that capability to walk through the good times, but she knows how to navigate that underworld.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
really comes through for you too in your
Yeah.
book. And I think that is the journey. That is the power of the journey is learning. I'll read another quote later, but is learning how to navigate all of that. And
Yeah.
that's what built, I'm imagining, like built you into who you see yourself to be today.
Yeah, the key word there is learning.
Hmm.
And this is where I really, 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 really struggle with our strategy, at least the Euro-American strategy of medicating children, is by, these drugs, they work for some people in the sense that they do take the emotion away.
Which
And
is very convenient if you
yeah,
don't want to deal with big
right.
emotion.
And it's not, doesn't work for everyone. Or and
Yeah.
again, work is a not a great term here, but we're going to use it.
I've heard the statistic is anxiety medication is truly effective for 1 in 5 people.
Uh, I mean, you can find any study to confirm any pretty much anything in this realm. There's a lot of crap science out there.
Mhm.
A lot of crap science out there. So, I tend to look for the research that is repeatable, which again,
Mhm.
almost none of it is. But the main one that the main number that tends to be repeated over and over again when you look at systematic analysis or meta-analysis of the studies that exist is 15% for depression. I don't
Mhm.
know about anxiety, but for depression, the number that comes up is that in approximately 15% of antidepressant users find a benefit that is statistically significant beyond a placebo, which is not high.
That is so low. That's just what I was gonna say. That is so low, and I wish we were telling people that
Yeah.
before they signed up, because when you read about what you went through getting off, and I
Yeah.
went through a similar journey, you have to weigh that
Yeah.
with the 15% and is this worth it?
Yeah.
Because for me, getting off was horrendous.
Mhm.
And I was never told that that would be a
Yeah.
journey that would really debilitate me. And it doesn't sound like you were either.
No, yeah, no, I was definitely not told about that. I mean, it was 2016 when I started coming off my antidepressants. So it was
Mhm.
ephedrine, Wellbutrin, which the generic names for those are venlafaxine and bupropion for the
Mhm.
non-Americans out there. Um, yeah, I was told that if I had any withdrawal symptoms, if there was going to we started with that, might feel like I had the flu for a few days, and symptoms would usually pass in a couple days, maybe a couple weeks if I was really unlucky.
Mm.
That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then good luck, right?
Yeah. Good
Because
luck.
your journey is really detailed and in the days and what you experienced. And do you want to share a little bit about that with our audience?
Yeah. So again, I went into this experience. There's a couple important things. So I had the sense, or rather, I'm good at following directions. So, when the commercial tells you to go see your doctor before making any medication changes, I decided to go see my doctor before I made any medication changes. Like, I did what I was supposed to do. I went and saw a psychiatrist and I told her, what was going on. And that, the other thing about this is I had this, incredible opportunity to travel around the world for a year. And so I didn't want to be on all these drugs, or I didn't want to be in the state I was when I left.
Mhm.
And I had about 6 months from the time I decided to get off the drugs I was on to when I was supposed to get on a plane. And I thought that was going to be more than enough time. So I really thought I was like giving myself plenty of padding to really land gently and, you know, go into the eat, pray, love experience that I was destined to have.
Yes.
All of which never happened. So I told her all this, and first despite the fact that I had been on these drugs for 15 years and that they had not changed since the time I was a teenager, she still did not support the fact that I wanted to get off of them. I had to really push her into it. I kind of got her to a point where she was like, okay, I guess if you're going to do it, then stop taking your Effexor. Now, this was terrible advice. I also understand why she told me to do that. At the time, I was on 37.5 milligrams of Effexor, which in the U.S., in the U.S., that's the lowest dose on the market. That's considered a therapeutic dose.
Yeah.
So then they use these words, therapeutic, right? It's supposed to tell you that it's not very much, which also a load of poo. And so from her perspective, she could not prescribe a lower dose because the pharmaceutical company literally doesn't make it.
Right.
And so I understand why in 2016, that's why she told me to just stop. I didn't know at the time that there were other resources out there for other ways to more properly taper down. And now we have even more resources for people. And we should get into that at some point. We can explain.
Absolutely.
I can explain how you do this if
your
doctor does what I did or mine did. But I didn't know any of that at the time. So I just followed the directions. And within a couple days, I was having just horrific psychological, emotional, and physical symptoms that were unlike anything I had experienced before. And because I didn't know that this was a possibility, I literally thought I was actually unhinged and nuts. And like I was having, violent visions, like in my mind's eye of horrific things that I'd never experienced that. It was so scary because I worried that I might act on it.
Yeah.
And that was the one symptom that was the scariest for me. But I also had, mood swings that were just so extreme and so rage filled that it scared me. My vision changed, my hearing changed. They both got better and more acute. I developed a skin issue called, well, it's actually a blood issue called nodular vasculitis, but it manifests in the skin where it looked like I had like BB pellets that were all lodged underneath my skin, and they were really tender and purpley. And it's a stress reaction, an autoimmune thing caused by blood vessels that constrict under huge amounts of stress, which my body had just been put into the stress. I struggled to wear clothes because the fibers hurt my skin so much. And
we're not talking about this. We're not talking about how this is a possibility if you get on and then ever want to get off. And this is thank you for coming here and sharing this, because it is so important that we have information. If we are going to take something that can do that to us and have these side effects, we need to know that. We need the information. And so I think that's the great disservice, is that everything can be seen as depression these days, very normal reactions. And then once we're given something to help it for our brain wiring, we are not told that this is all a possibility.
No, and I mean, the misinformation starts really early, right? Yes. The fact that no one knows how antidepressants work. No one knows, right? But the amount of articles you will read in both clickbait articles all the way up to some of, the most highly regarded newspapers in the world will say they work by correcting a chemical imbalance in the brain. We don't know that. And it's like the chemical imbalance has not only never been proven, it's now been disproven. And furthermore, like when is the last time you got a test to see whether or not you have a chemical imbalance or
what your brain
your
chemistry.
yes. No, it doesn't exist, right? So this narrative has been pushed on us for so long. So then when we hear it, we're like, that sounds like something I heard before.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and so then people are in pain and they take these drugs. And then as far as, the side effects and, what could be called informed consent that we don't really have is, yes, you get it, you get the thing from the pharmacist and there's a list of side effects, or you watch the commercial and some speed talker goes through all the side effects in a matter of seconds, and that's what's considered informed consent. That's
Right.
not it, because context is important for these things. Like,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you're told that 1 in 2 million people have suicidal ideation from a drug, well, then that might be a risk you're willing to take.
Mhm.
But, Lexapro was recently just approved for use in 7 to 12-year-olds in the US. In the study that the FDA approved, like, so they have to submit 2 studies. One of the one that the FDA used to approve the drug showed a 6-fold increase in suicidal ideation amongst these kids that they were testing, and they still approved the drug. When you
Mhm.
actually look at those numbers and the percentage that, like, it increased, it's big, right? And if I'm a parent, like,
Mhm.
I wanna know that, because
Absolutely.
even if I still make the choice to put my kid on this drug for
Yep.
whatever reason, if my kid then starts showing suicidal ideation, maybe there's a light bulb in my head that goes off that says, "Hey, this is the drug. It's not my kid." Like,
Yes. Yes.
instead, what happens is parents think, "Oh my god, my kid is getting worse," and they put him on more, and then it gets worse and worse
I
and worse, and
yes.
then, we have the tragedies.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
So the consent here, needs to be a discussion. It needs to
Absolutely.
be a discussion that's as long as the appointment. It
Yeah.
probably needs to be a fully separate appointment with time in between. Here's the information, here's the discussion, to you now have to make time in your schedule, go home, think about it, come back in a month, and if you still want it, then maybe then we prescribe it, right? But that's not
Absolutely.
how it is. We get a stupid little pamphlet with print so small most people can't read it. We get a series of documents that protect the doctor that none of us read because it's 25 pages long and filled with legalese that most people can't understand. And then
Mhm.
we get a 5-minute appointment with a guaranteed diagnosis code so the doctor can bill the insurance.
Yes. Right. Right. And I think that's the most important part that I want our audience to leave with. I have clients who really are glad they're on antidepressants and they see it as something helpful in their life. And that is their personal decision. And I want this informed consent piece to be a bigger conversation, and I want it to be a conversation where the client is fully informed, but they're also fully on board. Because what I'm finding happening is a lot of clients aren't fully on board, but they, like you and like I, trust the professionals and
Mhm.
are do what they're told. They're rule followers and they
Yeah.
trust the professionals. And so I want there to be some more education and awareness of the overall arc, because I don't ever believe that they're meant to be long term. I mean, I'll stand by
Well,
that. Like, while I think they have their time and place, I don't think they're ever meant to be long term, because I don't.
they're not studied for that, though. The
They're
studies
yeah,
are all short term. They're 8 to 12-week drug trials that are mostly done by the pharmaceutical companies, and those are just the ones we see,
yes,
right?
and we can literally rewire our own brains. I mean,
Yeah.
the research supports that. So if we can, I mean, EMDR, neurofeedback, there's so many services out there that we can go to work with our brain chemistry, if that's really the issue. Although my favorite trauma experts believe all mental health is trauma based, which
Mhm.
makes more sense to me. But if we really believe we have this chemical imbalance, there are other ways to work with rewiring our brains that
Yeah.
are very, very effective and that work. And so, psychedelics
There
are being researched. I mean, there's just so many options. And so I want the people to know all the options, right? Instead of this is the only option.
Right, and I think we have to get rid of or get away from the chemical imbalance brain chemistry thing.
Absolutely.
Not only because in the mental health world, we know it's bunk, right?
Yeah.
But our brain chemistry, and it just sounds so elementary, the words, our mind and our brain and our whole body is being influenced, and levels of stuff is changing all the time. You eat chocolate, you have a glass of
Yeah.
wine, you go
Yeah.
exercise,
Yep.
all of these things are affecting what's going on in our head. So if you want to change your brain chemistry, and you go have a glass of wine, you've done that.
Right.
So I think we need to understand that it's not like our brain is just running amok for no reason. It
Yes.
is
Yes.
taking in
Yes.
the input
Yes.
constantly
Yes.
and basically updating like software every day
Absolutely.
based on what we feed it and what we do. And, I think it's really interesting, like the whole taxi driver. Do
Mhm.
you know the whole taxi driver thing? Like this is one of the, I think, the great studies of neuroplasticity where when they were scanning, I'm going to get some of this wrong probably, but we'll get the gist. When they do brain scans on taxi drivers, at least back in the day before, Waze and Google Maps, the
Uh-huh.
area of the brain for spatial awareness and like map reading was so much stronger because they spent
Mhm.
their time thinking about that and solving their problems.
Yep.
And then they
Yep.
followed up with people who were no longer taxi drivers, and it changed. They stopped
Mhm.
using that skill, and so it changed. And so this is just an example of how we can like literally reorient our mind based on
Absolutely.
what we're doing.
Yes. 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 And I think most people start to get off, and it's so horrific that they
Mhm.
say, "Oh God, no,
Oh
I'm
no.
not doing this."
Yeah.
So, gosh, there's so much I could talk to you for hours more, but for time's sake,
How much time do we have? I should
and
stop.
usually it's like 30 minutes,
All
but
right, I'll stop rambling. Ask book questions. Go order
I
no
will
cause
I
side
want
effects
to
available
talk
wherever books are
about
sold.
safe ways to get off, safe
Yeah.
ways to get
Okay.
off because, I think that's
Yeah.
important. I
It's
think most
important.
people are gonna turn around and head back and say, "Nope." They'll use that as proof that they have a chemical imbalance because they try to get off and they're like,
Yeah.
"See, my brain isn't working
Yeah.
correctly." So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Okay. Well, if we so the kind of bitter irony about this is that the drugs actually do cause a chemical imbalance in the
Right,
brain.
right, right.
Because what happens is that, these drugs, let's go with SSRIs. So that's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So what happens is the drug blocks if there's like a lock and a key, it blocks kind of the lock aspect of it. And so the natural neurotransmitters in the brain, they kind of down regulate because they don't have as many locks to go into. It's a
Right.
very, very silly way to explain it, and it's more complicated than that. But hopefully that will help people understand, because if the drug has been doing the work of the mind, of the brain, then the
Mm,
brain kind of stops doing its own thing. It stops
right.
producing. And so if you start to pull that drug away, all of a sudden it's like the brain is producing less of of the neurotransmitters, and you still have these blocks. And so then the body kind of, we think that's what happens, is the body goes a little bit haywire. So now you do have an actual chemical imbalance, and then the body needs to
Right.
normalize again and get to know itself, and that creates withdrawal symptoms. And so the way that the leading researchers are recommending that we deal with this at this point in time, and like all good research, this could change, but as of 2023, most of the researchers, and a lot of this research is coming out of the UK,
Mm,
they're advocating for something called hyperbolic tapering,
mhm.
which is it's a very slow taper that takes the shape of a curve when you actually plot it on a graph. So let's say you were taking 100 milligrams of some drug, and maybe the next dose on the market is 75. Instead of
Mhm.
taking that big jump, which is could be quite a lot for the brain to handle, you take a 10% cut. So you take 10% of 100 is 10 grams. So
Mhm.
then you subtract that. And so 100 minus 10 is 90. So then
Mm,
we need to find a way to get 90 grams of this drug in
mhm.
your body for a while. And then if we're feeling good, then we step down again and maybe another 10% cut. So this time it's going to naturally be smaller. So what is 10% of 90? 9. So 90 minus 9 is 81. So now we have to
Mm,
find 81 grams, and so on and so forth until you get down to 0. And if you're keeping up with this, it means that the cuts get smaller and smaller and it takes longer as you go down. It can be incredibly tedious. And the problem, of course, is that the pharmaceutical company doesn't make 81 grams of Prozac.
Oh, right. Exactly. Yes.
Yes. So the way we get around this is compound pharmacies that we have are in the compound pharmacies are great because they make custom doses. So let's say you're working with your doctor and it's a withdrawal informed doctor and they say, we're going to write you this script for 81 milligrams. They send it off to the compound pharmacy. The compound pharmacy knows how to handle each drug in a way where you can either get, you get a tablet or you get a capsule, or sometimes it's suspended in a liquid, depending on the drug. And you take your 81 grams until it's time to step down to the next one. 81 minus 8.1. Now we start to get into math that makes my brain hurt a little bit. And
no one is talking about this, though. Honestly, no one is talking about this. It's just not being discussed, even as a therapist who works with psychiatrists. Yeah, it is. It's not being discussed. And I think supporting the body, I'm all about mind, body, spirit connection. In addition to this, honestly, I think acupuncture and chiropractic work and massage and things that you can do to calm the nervous system, support the nervous system. I took a bunch of herbs from my acupuncturist and vitamins, because there is research that you need boosted vitamin Bs and vitamin Ds and different supplements that can help with your body during massive transitions like this too. So there's a medical approach, which no one's talking about. So thank you for talking about this. And there's also a holistic approach. And I think it's combining the two is really powerful.
I don't disagree as a general rule, but the bigger message, it's both the bigger and the more specific message, is that the person who's going through the taper really needs to learn to listen to their body and drive the ship, because the problem is, and I see this a lot, right? Like there's so little. I mean, the research on antidepressants, despite the fact that it's been 35 years of Prozac, is already pretty limited in the sense that we study short-term trials. A lot of the studies that the stuff is built upon aren't great, and yet there's a lot of information, but it's not necessarily good information. There is some really great studies on withdrawal, but they're limited and they're new. There's very little research in general on gut health and, supplements. There's none on gut health and supplements and withdrawal, as far as I know. And what happens is that withdrawal can put people into such a delicate state that their bodies really can't handle a lot of change, like a lot of, like just moving stuff, like changing supplements and whatnot. It can't, some people have a lot of trouble even like just trying one supplement. They'll have it'll induce a withdrawal reaction if they just try and go take zinc or something. And I mean, it becomes so specific that I really don't like to generally recommend supplements for people when they're in acute withdrawal, because I don't know what it might do. That doesn't mean it won't necessarily work for some people, but I think if you're one of these people who's having a really severe withdrawal reaction, then it seems like kind of the less is more approach tends to be a little bit better or a little less risky. I don't know, man. It's so tricky, and like we're not giving people blood tests and we're not testing and
we're not looking at it. That's interesting. That's really interesting. There's a psychologist, Leslie Korn, who looks at, she believes the gut is the missing link in mental health. And she does a lot of research around that and has written several books, but not with withdrawal. So that is its own specific thing. Yeah. And so I do want people, if they're considering antidepressants, to look at her information and read her books, because I think there is a lot of, when we look at all of our brain chemistry, 90% is made in our gut. There's a link there. Something's happening there.
Oh yeah. And I mean, we know that antidepressants are very rough on the gut, and they can create some major problems for people. That my gut issues have been the longest lasting side effect from all my years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it's an important topic, and I'm so grateful. I feel there's so much more I want to cover with you.
More time.
For time's sake, there's so many more
Oh,
quotes I had highlighted. And so what I'll say is read this book. Read this book if you're considering getting on antidepressants, if you're considering getting off antidepressants, informed consent, looking into the research, looking into the information. This is just an incredibly important topic for our time. So may cause side effects. It's your memoir. And I could just keep talking and talking about this endlessly for hours, but I know you're also cooking.
Oh, yeah. I will say just a couple more things about the book. I wrote it. It took many years to write. It's written for patients, prescribers, and parents slash support system. So like it's written from a purely memoir standpoint. It's not a pop science book. I don't really get into too much of the research, but I did that on purpose because I really want prescribers to read it and I think it helps them identify withdrawal as a thing and will help them understand what their patients are going through. And I think it helps patients understand that they're not alone and that they can get out of it. I mean, we didn't talk about that, but like I'm doing great now.
Yes. Yes.
And then for parents too, there's so many long-term effects that we didn't consider at the time that I think it's really important for them to understand. And so, this book, this is not a vanity publish. It's not something I just threw together in 6 months. It was picked up by a traditional publisher. It's available anywhere in the world, wherever books are sold. And it's the first book on antidepressant withdrawal to have been published in this way and marketed toward the mass market. So I think it's a really big deal, and I'm really proud of it because it means that this topic is finally being addressed.
Yes.
Absolutely. So that's why I hope people read it. It's also on audiobook as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. It's a really important topic. And I'm so grateful you chose to be bold and courageous and vulnerable, to put yourself out there, to share your story. I know it's going to help a lot of people. I deeply know that. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And that was another quote I wanted to look at. It's like, yes, you went through this rough time, but you are thriving today. And you even have a blog called Happiness is a Skill.
Yeah, it's a newsletter. Happiness is a skill.
Happiness is a skill. And so you have found your skills for happiness and how to thrive post antidepressant withdrawal. So I think that's an important piece here.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.